thrilled to see everybody here. Thank you for coming. Before we jump into our talk about the Cayuga power plant, I first want to invite Sandra Steingraber up to deliver some pretty amazing news for the day.
A lot of you may have heard it, but it's very sweet to say it. So today, the DEC, after 8 years of deliberation, has denied the LPG permit for the storage of it's really finished that Crestwood has been denied, and there's no more possibility for that. And that was after they canceled voluntarily their own expansion of methane, which was the other fossil fuel they wanted to store under the lake, both of which required immense amounts of citizen activism, both the direct action campaign that I helped to lead, but also an opera and a cast of thousands led by wineries, Gas-Free Seneca, elected officials, and so on. And the end game of this was quite complicated, and it was some amazingly beautiful inside baseball chess maneuvering by some very smart activists who really knew what they were doing. So bravo to everyone. I know Irene is one of our fellow defenders. We have a lot in the room. So may this good news be the wind in our sails tonight as we now move to our beloved Cayuga Lake and try to shut this idea down as well. Really?
Not really. Okay. But I want
Later. So there is some other good news that I also want to let people know about. It's a fight that probably many of you are less aware of, but also a years-long fight. The Dunkirk power plant out in western New York seems to have decided that they are not able to repower, to convert from coal to gas.
Wow.
So that's and we've got our fingers crossed because it's been 4 times already that that zombie plant has come back to life. So we're hoping that it's finally done for good. So I kind of hate this. Come again?
An announcement of an upcoming event?
No, not in the middle of
Daily Hall?
No. Great. When we're done.
Okay.
So I kind of hate this occasion, but you know that we're here about the Cayuga power plant again. But it's summer, right? Time for sequels, so here we are. And so with that, so here we are, Repowering Cayuga, the sequel. You'll notice the date that's crossed off on here, September 2014. This has been a many years long fight as well. To give just a quick overview, I think, and I'm thrilled actually, that a lot of the faces in here are new to me. So I love that there are more people getting involved and engaged. We're sending around a sign-up sheet, so please be sure to give us your contact information because we're going to need you for this fight. The Cayuga power plant was built in the mid-1950s, so it puts it, well, at the age of about half of you in the room, probably about 65 years old or so. Consists of 2 coal-burning units, each with a capacity of 150 megawatts. And in December of 2011, the power plant declared bankruptcy. They said that gas had gotten cheaper than coal. There were new costly environmental standards, and it was uneconomic for them to continue operating. So they said, you know, we gotta fold up. I don't know what's going on here. So the New York State Public Service Commission said, hold on, you can't. There's a reliability concern. So sorry that this slide is a little wonky. What reliability is the ability to have power when you need it without stressing the system. And what was realized is that up in Auburn, that on really hot summer days, without this power plant, the transmission lines up in Auburn were at risk of overheating. And so there were two ways to address this reliability concern. And one way was to fix the transmission lines up in Auburn, and the other was to keep this power plant going, which actually has, I called it a backdoor. There is a power line that runs from this plant up to Auburn through the other, through the south instead of where their major electric supply comes. And they could convert this plant to burn fracked gas and send power up that way. And so this became a decision in front of the Public Service Commission starting in January of 2012. They were at this crossroads of fixing the grid or convert to gas and coal. It was clearly cheaper to fix the grid, around $240 million, whereas it was going to be $330 to upgrade the power plant. And one would have been investing our money, because during this whole time we had to pay to keep the power plant operating, to provide the reliability. And one way is investing money into the future, and the other is investing money into the infrastructure and fuels of the past. So this was a decision before the Public Service Commission. Meanwhile, we were saddled with paying roughly $4 million a month throughout 2013 and through 2017 to support this plant while a decision was made and ultimately the upgrades were made to the system. We paid in excess of $188 million to the Cayuga power plant, some of which money did go to NYSEG, but we paid this in what was called reliability support services payment to keep the plant operating, paying their taxes, paying their payroll, paying their fuel costs, so that they could be available if needed.
Who's we, taxpayer?
All of us who are NYSEG customers. It was the responsibility of the utility to maintain the reliability of the grid, and that reliability gets passed on to us to pay for whatever they have to do to maintain that reliability. So what did we do? We got engaged and we started fighting. And we fought up at the power plant, and we went to the Public Service Commission in Albany and protested there in their very staid kind of meetings. Countless trips to Albany, big rallies, towns passed resolutions, and finally in February of 2016, the no-brainer solution was chosen by the Public Service Commission. They said fix the grid in Auburn, and that grid was upgrade was completed by last summer. So since last summer, amazingly enough, this power plant has managed to operate without any support. All these years we've been paying because they cried poverty that they couldn't afford to operate. Well, they've been operating for a year now, and I assure you they've done okay. So in the process, we learned quite a bit about this power plant. We learned that it's a dirty, dangerous coal plant. In 2015 and again in 2016, there were emergencies at the plant that put lives at risk. Thankfully, nobody was harmed, but in one incident, a fin came off of the generator, which spins, basically kind of like a jet engine, thousands of RPMs per minute. And a fin came flying off and spinning through and slicing up the pipes. It took 8 months of shutting down that one generating unit to repair all the damage that was done. A year later, they were putting an environmental control into the stack or chimney from the other unit, Unit 2, and there was a fire in the stack. And that stack is now defunct. They haven't been able to use it, and they've had to vent stack 2 through, somehow there's a bypass into chimney 1, so that's what they've done. John Dennis is here, and I'm sure if there are questions afterwards about the 42 acres of coal ash, much of which is unlined, that coal ash has, from the bottom of it, what's called leachate, the goo that oozes out, into a pond where it's captured, diluted with rainwater, and then discharged into the lake, 25 million gallons a year of leachate. And last summer, following a FOIL request, so Cayuga didn't even bother to notify anybody that they had been releasing mercury into Cayuga Lake at 2,000% above the permitted limits. So this is a really dangerous, dirty, heard it referred to as hunk of junk old plant. It needs to go. Their existing furnace system, and I bring this up, and I think Tony will have some stuff to talk about that'll relate to this coming up. Their existing furnace system is the coal furnace with a steam turbine. So if you look on the left, you'll see the coal comes into a silo and it gets milled up into a fine powder and then blown into a furnace where it's ignited and boils water that turns into steam and runs through some pipes and spins the steam turbine to create electricity. It's an old furnace, old style.
Steam engine.
What they're proposing to do with this upgrade is to just switch out, instead of coal being the fuel, they're going to keep everything the same and just add gas. So the same kind of system will be used. And I just want to give you a sense, comparative sense. There's a more efficient kind of turbine that gets used often now. And it's a simple cycle gas turbine. So what happens there is oil and gas mixes with air, it's fired up, and it directly spins a turbine. There's gas exhaust that goes out, and it's the turbine spins and spins the generator and makes electricity. The most efficient is a very expensive plant to build, but it adds a whole heat recapture system. All of those things that you just saw added from there to here, that captures the heat and brings it back down and through another turbine so that it spins and makes even more power from burning the gas. So this plant will be one of the most inefficient kinds of power plants if and when this repowering goes through. Their new proposal is prompted because they were no longer able to meet their even existing air emission standards from Stack 2. And so they were told by the state that they had to either close Unit 2 down by July 1st or modify to burn gas. And so they've chosen to modify their air emissions permit. They filed that May 1st at the DEC to convert Unit 2 to burn gas. And they do, as I described, plan to just change the nozzle. They've let us know in the Lansing paper that they expect 25 to 60 trucks a day of CNG, is compressed natural gas, to be brought in to this plant, and that it would be used for peak demand times, so that they know that they would not be competitive as compared to either nuclear plants or these combined cycle power plants that per unit of fuel produce much more energy. So it costs, the electricity that this plant will be able to generate is going to cost more, and therefore, it's not going to be in demand except on really high peak hot days like we had for the beginning of this month. So that's what we knew about their proposal until some people here went up to the DEC and started looking at the documents. We filed a Freedom of Information request, and what we learned is that they also would like to convert Unit 1. So in other words, convert both of them to burn gas. We're not quite sure when. And that they would like to have a pipeline if both units convert. And interestingly, they told the DEC that they would be bringing in 30 trucks a day, not the 25 to 60 that they've told us. So, what we know is that we're not getting the full story from them. So, I'd like to rename this slideshow Defeating Cayuga, the sequel, but that's going to depend on all of you. And so we are passing around a sign-up sheet, and I hope that you'll join in our efforts as we mobilize to Albany and mobilize to the DEC and make phone calls and make the noise that we need to stop this plant once and for all. So thank you for your attention. I'm going to turn it over now to Karen.
so thrilled to see everybody here. This is a bigger crowd than we even expected. So can everybody hear me?
Can you hear me?
No.
Is there
No, you just have to speak louder.
I am going to speak loudly. So, I want to talk a little bit about the potential risks, routes, and community impacts that may be presented by this truck traffic that would be coming through to the Cayuga power plant. And just some of you know me already. I work for the Fracked Alliance. I live in Lansing, but work on issues throughout New York State and up and down the East Coast. And Fracked Alliance is a not-for-profit that uses maps and analysis to communicate the risks of oil and gas. And many of you have worked with me on the bans and moratoria and issues around the Borger Station and so forth. So Fracked Tracker's here to help everybody, and very happy to talk to anybody after the meeting. I have my cards in the back. So the virtual pipeline that is being proposed to deliver gas to the Cayuga power plant is a relatively new phenomenon. There's not a very, very lengthy track record of this technology bringing large quantities of compressed natural gas to power plants, because in the past, pipelines were built to fully functioning power plants, and that's simply not the situation that's going on right now. Okay, talk louder. That's not the situation that's being proposed for the Cayuga power plant. It's only going to be operating as a peak plant, and they have determined that gas will be brought in by tractor trailer. This compressed natural gas comes in a series of long canisters that are 40 to 50 feet long on tractor trailers. The gas is compressed at around 3,600 pounds per square inch, and it would travel over some unknown distance to get to the power plant. So a lot of what we know, or what we're talking about, is somewhat speculative because we have not been told the details, and they may not even be worked out yet, of where that gas is going to be supplied from. So there is gas that has been being brought from Pennsylvania to Little Falls, New York, and there are people in the room who have much more experience with this virtual pipeline east of us than I do. But since last February, there have been a minimum of 3 to 4 accidents that have happened with the compressed natural gas trailers that have been delivering gas to Mannheim. Those trucks are making about 80 trips a day, as compared to the 25 to 60 that we would possibly see at Cayuga. But the accidents do not include explosions, but just short of that, there have been tip-overs, there have been rollovers, there have been backsliding down icy roads and sideswiping of vehicles. And so the notion that this many large trucks traversing our roads, through our communities, on our state highways, is an absolute fail-safe way of moving the gas is simply a fallacy. What I want to talk to you about is what some of those facilities and some of the places that those truck routes might be passing that could particularly put our communities, our people, at risk. So this analysis just looks at a 25-mile radius from the Cayuga power plant outward to sources where that gas might be coming from. The distance that the trucks are traveling from Pennsylvania to Little Falls, New York is greatly in excess of this. So I will tell you that this is a very lowball estimate, the numbers that I'm going to be showing you right now. So the Cayuga power plant, there it is at the north end of Lansing on the lake in bright green. Let's are the gas transmission lines, the major gas lines that go through that 25-mile radius around the Cayuga power plant. And you can see that very few major power lines come through the east side of the county.
Is that the blue or red?
The blue. The blue. So along those transmission lines, we have facilities. There are meter stations along the gas lines, and those are in pink. And then there are 2 compressor stations, one here in Ellis Hollow at Borger, and the other one all the way over west of Seneca Lake. So those are existing facilities that have buildings, that have loading docks, and so forth, but they likely would have to be retrofitted and more construction done if those facilities were used. So just on the supposition that gas trucks would be traveling from some of those obviously existing facilities, I plotted those routes and tried to stick to state roads as closely as I could. And you can see from those dark black lines, there would be trucks that could be coming through Cortland, there could be trucks that would be coming through Ithaca or around Ithaca. There's no way easily to pass through Watkins Glen. And also remember what I said about some of those accidents backsliding on icy hills. The idea would probably be to avoid the steepest hills going in and out of Lansing. So there are some very clear limitations on the routes. Certainly going through Auburn in the north, there could be a lot of truck traffic too. I took a look at the census data from 2010, and those roads would come within a quarter mile of somewhere between 32 and 50,000 people potentially. You cannot get gas to the Cayuga operating plant without going through populated areas. And it wouldn't be 30,000 people on a single route, but the potential for impact is quite large of who would be seeing these trucks coming and going past their houses, past their schools, past their other facilities. So there's a half-mile buffer to those roads, just to give you a sense of where that distance is. And generally the evacuation distance, if there were an explosion, and even in the case of the recent event the last couple of days, quarter-mile radius is generally where they would evacuate if something went bad, but it could be more. Okay, so in the green triangles, those are the locations of all of the public schools. Private schools are in those black crosses. Daycare facilities in the purple. Healthcare facilities, those include hospitals, clinics, long-term care, and hospice facilities in a variety of other circle colors. So here's what the numbers look like. Just looking at that quarter-mile radius, those trucks would pass within a quarter mile of 9 private schools, 28 public schools, 26 of those daycare facilities, 28 healthcare facilities. If you broaden the distance to a half a mile, the numbers go up. And that's just in the 25-mile radius of Cayuga operating. Remember, the gas that's coming from Pennsylvania up to Mannheim is a much longer distance, so those numbers would go up a lot. So what can we do? Well, right now it's a little bit of a watch and wait and strategize game because we do not have enough information, and we're doing our best to route that out. But I wanted to tell you about one tool that this not-for-profit that I work for, Fracked Alliance, we developed a mobile app that you can download either for the Android or the iPhone, and it allows you in real time to document oil and gas infrastructure sights, smells, sounds that you think seem to be of concern. That goes into our database and it's shared back out to anybody else who has this app. Right now, there are wells, there are pipelines, there are tons of pictures, there are tons of reports, and I encourage all of you, if you're on the watch for things like this that could be impacting your community, the thing to do is to get that information centralized where everybody can share it and see it. This is completely free, so I'd encourage you to have a look at this and give us your feedback. So that's my contact information. Again, I've got cards in the back and some brochures about Frack Tracker. I'm happy to talk more after the meeting. I know that Ross had some comments. Do you want to wait for comments afterwards?
Yeah,
or-
I think we'll get everybody.
Okay, so Ross had some comment about the truck transportation, and we'll wait until the presenters have gone.
There are some index cards up there. If you want to pass those around, people can write down their questions. That might be
Where are they?
Yeah, I
I
think
love the stack of them up there.
Ross had more of a statement, but that's a good idea to pass questions.
Can I also just check in on the pad of paper that was going around to collect people's
They're over
comments?
there on the table, and it seems to be, they've gone all around.
Are there people who haven't signed it?
They definitely haven't gone all around it.
Hasn't John over here?
Well, there's
Okay.
two. There's a,
Let's keep passing them because it's really important.
there's
All
the
right.
spiral.
Tony? Tony?
There too.
Applause to Karen.
Oh, darling. Oh, if we full screen it?
I think that's yours up there.
Yeah. So we can try to make it full screen.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Hi, folks. Thank you very much for asking me to communicate with you tonight. I've been asked to do two things. One, to confirm as best that we can the number of expected truck trips to do what you just heard described by Irene, to convert one of the turbines to be spun by steam generated by natural gas instead of by coal. So you've already heard a couple of different numbers, and so since we PSE people are the numbers people, we ran the numbers. So assuming, as we've been told, that they're going to convert one of the turbines to natural gas power instead of coal power, and using their specification for that generator of 150 megawatts, assuming that each truck is going to transport 400 decatherms, 400,000 cubic feet of natural gas, and using what we know about how much gas is necessary to be burned to create a megawatt of electricity. Follow all that? Good. You get a simple equation. I'm going to show you the equation. And the equation depends clearly on how often the plant is going to be run. That's called the capacity factor. It has an ultimate capacity of 150 megawatts, but it's not going to be running 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. It's a peaker plant. It will be called upon to supply the electricity at various times. So depending upon how often it runs, you get a different number of truck trips. And these are round trips. So if the plant were running only 1/10 of its capacity, not 24 hours a day, 2.4 hours per day, at 150 megawatts, it would take about 20 trips. On the other hand, if it's running half of the time, it would take nearly 100 trips. And you can interpolate in between. So you don't have to listen to what you hear in a press release or a radio broadcast or somebody meeting with DEC behind closed doors. It's physics. It's basic physics. Those assumptions are ironclad. Unless they want to use a smaller truck, then there'll be more trucks. If they want to use a bigger truck, there'll be fewer trucks. But that's what physics says. So that's the first thing I wanted to do, and now you can take it to the bank. So if somebody says there's only going to be 20 trips a day or 30 trips a day, the answer is, how frequently are you going to have the power turned on? Okay, got it? Okay, second thing I was asked to do was go directly to the slide that Irene showed, which took the coal out and put the natural gas in, and answer the question, from a climate change point of view, is that a smart thing to do? Is there a climate benefit in coal switching for power generation? That's a rhetorical question right now. To answer it, we got to go all the way back to 2011. In 2011, my colleagues then at Cornell, Bob Howarth and Renee Santoro, and I published a paper. It started a shitstorm, pardon my French. Because in that paper, you can read what it says, we alleged that coal switching, that is, shutting down a coal-fired power plant and turning on a natural gas-fired power plant, that is what we're talking about tonight, is not beneficial for climate. Because not only do you burn CO2 both ways, not only do you get CO2 both ways. When you burn coal, you emit CO2. When you burn natural gas, you emit CO2. And up to that point, everybody, including the President of the United States, George W. Bush. No. Donald Trump. No. Even Barack Obama said, well, that's it. We're done. It's better. They all forgot about methane. Nobody was focused on methane. Basically, the only thing our paper did was to open people's eyes to methane. And boy, were there a lot of eyes open. So we predicted in 2011, based on sketchy information, very poor data, because since nobody had been concerned about methane, no one was measuring it. I don't mean the methane that's in the pipeline that gets to the burner tip in the coal-fired power plant. I'm talking about the methane that comes out of the ground at a fracked well and doesn't get into the pipeline. Or the methane that goes to a compressor station and gets out of the pipeline. Or all the other places methane can leak and get into the atmosphere unburned. Got it? 2011. Fast forward 1 year, the Environmental Defense Fund gets $35 million from the former mayor of New York City, who was a pro-gasser. Great liberal guy, even though he's a Republican. No political comments on that, right?
Oh, it's okay.
I say whatever the hell I want to say. The Environmental Defense Fund, and Bob Howarth, by the way, my colleague, was the former chief scientist of the Environmental Defense Fund. The Environmental Defense Fund starts a long-term research project with $35 million from the former mayor of New York City and a bunch of oil and gas companies and a couple of philanthropic groups. And they say they're going to do the definitive national study. They are going to determine how much methane gets into the atmosphere unburned from oil and gas operations. That's what they said in 2012. And they published a paper and they said, well, eventually we're going to get the answer, but in the meantime, let us tell you what the implications would be depending on the answer. And the key thing I want you to look at is this diagram right here. This diagram says, this is year after you switch a power plant from coal to natural gas. And this is the leak rate, how much methane is getting into the atmosphere unburned. And this is their prediction of climate benefit. Look at the black solid line. That black solid line says as long as the leak rate, national, is less than 3.2%, there is the immediate climate benefit to switch from coal to natural gas. Would be as long as the leak rate is less than 3.2%. And remember, in 2012, we didn't know what the leak rate was. Bob and Renee and I predicted it was somewhere between 3.6 and 7%. A year later, science comes in and says, your analysis that I just showed you is not quite right because it assumes that methane is only 72 times more powerful than carbon dioxide as a global warming agent. In 2013, New Science comes out and says 72 isn't the right number, it's 86. And so the break-even point at which it's beneficial for climate to substitute natural gas for coal to generate electricity drops from 3.2% to 2.7%. As I said back then, their window is closing. By the way, just as an aside, can I do an aside here and you can track with me? The proposal to bring natural gas to Cayuga Power is by CNG tankers, pulled by not diesel tractors, but CNG tractors. And they're saying, see, that's great, we're going to be good neighbors. We're not going to burn diesel to bring the CNG to the power plant, we're going to burn CNG. In order for a CNG tractor trailer to be more climate friendly than a diesel, the leak rate would have to be less than, what's that number? 0.8%. So CNG powered vehicles are dirty. The buses that you see in some cities powered by clean CNG, bullshit. My wife is here. Okay, back on track. So 2013, the break-even point. You know what I mean by that, right? Drops from 3.2 to 2.7. A month ago, after 7 years of their study, EDF publishes their summary paper. They took into account all 17 previous peer-reviewed papers they had published on the topic of methane emissions. Spent that $35 million and published a paper in the most prestigious journal in the world, Science. And this is what they concluded. 2.3% of all the methane produced by oil and gas operations in the United States doesn't get burned, it gets into the atmosphere. I'll get back to that. They also said, in red, I'm going to read it and then interpret it for you, methane emissions of this magnitude per unit of natural gas consumed produce the radiative forcing over a 20-year time horizon comparable to the CO2 from natural gas combustion. Did you get all that? Let me translate it for you. If it's leaking 2.3%, it's the same thing as if you burned it twice. Now do you get it? In other words, for every unit of gas that would go into the Cayuga power plant to generate electricity, you'd get CO2 by burning it. But because of the upstream methane emissions, you might as well have burned it 2 times. So using methane to generate electricity is the same as generating the electricity twice with the same amount of coal. Did you get that? Okay, but we got to return to this upper part, which I haven't said anything about. We expected when they published this paper a month ago that they would revise this chart again. Because between 2013 and now, the global warming potential of methane has again risen. Not 82 anymore, it's now 96. They didn't do it. They did not update their chart. So we did. And for the first time in human experience, you are the first people to see this updated chart. Renee Santoro, me, and Dave Hughes. So when we redo the calculations, the break-even point is now down to 2.4%. And now you're saying, okay, so but the leak rate is 2.3%. We're home free. Obama was right. Pausing for dramatic effect. So let me ask you a question. How many people have ever driven across a bridge?
How many people what?
Driven across a bridge. How many people have seen, as you're driving across the bridge, it says load limit 10 tons?
Right.
Or load limit 25 tons?
Right, yeah.
Where'd that number come from?
Bridge formula.
Are you absolutely certain that a truck that weighs 10 tons plus 1 pound will cause the bridge to collapse? Do you think that that weight limit is a factor of safety? Yeah, there's a factor of safety built into it. How many people have flown on an airplane?
There we go.
Okay, you get the point. There's factors of safety. Engineers build factors of safety. They're also called factors of ignorance and factors of uncertainty. That's what we do, because nothing is certain. Is that 2.3% certain? Look what it said. We measured emissions of 13 teragrams per year, plus or minus 2. You don't use a mean value to set policy, because that says you're absolutely certain of your mean value is the true value. There is no error. You don't do that, not when you're setting policy, not when you're flying in an airplane, not when you're driving across the bridge. All those things have factors of safety built into them. So how do we compute? How do we measure what value we should be using? It's very simple. The EDF study said there's a 95% probability that the actual leak rate is somewhere between 2% and 2.7%. And here's where you get the exam. Which value do you use for policy purposes?
Worst
The lower
case.
one or the upper one?
Worst case.
Thank you. You're all smart. So now what happens if we put that 2.7% on this graph? When does switching from coal to natural gas benefit the climate?
Not soon enough.
17 years from now. If they switch that plant, there's more to this yet, so hold on. If they switch that plant, as Irene described, to a burner tip that's just burning natural gas, there's no climate benefit for 17 years. Not only do we not have 17 years, but this curve isn't really right. Because that curve, which we redid based on the calculations that EDF said, assumed a combined cycle gas turbine. Ooh, remember the slides that Irene showed? There's a simple cycle gas turbine, not very efficient. Combined cycle gas turbine, very efficient. Just burning damn gas to create steam, really bad. So this curve, which we haven't redone yet, actually comes down to about here, which means that we would get climate benefit out of that plant somewhere around the time that I'm going to die. Okay, so that I just want to let you the simple answer to the question, is it a climate benefit? Is it correct? Is it honest for the DEC or the Cayuga Operating Company to tell you, the public, and tell the legislators and tell the regulators that they're doing good for climate by converting from coal to natural gas? The answer is a definitive no. My telling you that doesn't do a damn bit of good. So I encapsulated all this and sent it to Basil Sago's personal email. I'm waiting for his personal response.
We have letters right here.
That's it. That's the point.
All right.
My one email to him isn't going to do much, but hundreds and eventually thousands of such. DEC has to get on the science bandwagon and do right by you. This is what science says. Physics rules, science rules. So thank you for your attention, and maybe there'll be questions.
We are so lucky in this community to have your expertise on these projects. Lisa.
Yeah.
This is Lisa Marshall from Others Out Front.
I need to figure out how to put my laptop into the system here. Do that?
Better.
I have to.
This is you one of the lead on flash.
Yeah. Do that? So can you do that while I? Or no? Or is there no way I can just?
Here's the plug, but it really doesn't switch very well.
Why don't you guys, so who here came from Lansing today? Okay, great. Thank you so much for being here. I know that we were originally going to have this in Lansing, and then the venue didn't have air conditioning, and we got this great venue, and so we did that. I'm just trying to fix it up.
Why don't we, while Lisa's fussing, Tommy, I know you had an announcement. Maybe we can do some other announcements. Russ? Okay. Tommy, you want to?
Yeah, Josh Fox has a new play. It's going to perform in Daly Hall on the 24th. It's going to be free.
Of August.
Of August. And Cornell told me I could announce this. Not all of the papers have been signed, but I think they're pretty sure it's going to be signed, but they wouldn't have said that I could share this. So spread it around, let's pack the hall.
So for people who don't know, there's a lot of new faces here, Tommy. People may not know who Josh Fox is.
Josh Fox is an Emmy Award winning filmmaker, and he was the person who did Gasland, which, you know, is a big part of the anti-fracking movement.
You know the name of the place?
What's good?
The truth has changed.
Yeah. What he's doing is he wants to practice basically. HBO, he has a contract with HBO to do a movie, and he's taking this around to different venues as a play, and he's getting audience reaction, he's practicing, he's tweaking it, and then in September it's going to become a movie. It's going to be filmed.
Are there other announcements?
The trip to the DEC.
DEC, David, you want to do that now, or wait until your
Dave, why don't you
presentation?
come on up and...
It's part of my presentation, I feel like.
Yeah,
Okay,
you want to do yours
great.
first
Fine.
while I
Good.
do this? That's fine, because
Yeah.
I'm messing with technology here and wasting people's time, which I do not want to do.
Okay. So this is David Alicea. He's with Sierra Club. He's the regional organizer for New York State.
Great. Thank you guys for giving me the time to speak. So again, my name is David Alicea. I am the lead organizer for Sierra Club in New York. So that means I work with our volunteers as well as partners across Western New York and the Finger Lakes on coal, renewable energy, and transportation issues. I also work with organizing the Hudson Valley, New York City, Long Island. We're a big crew. So here we're going to focus on some of the work we've been doing around Cayuga. But before I jump into that, I want to give you guys some background of where I'm personally coming from in terms of climate work. And so I'm actually the first person in my family to not live on an island. So I grew up on Long Island, my parents are there, my brothers are there, and most of you folks know back in 2012 when Sandy hit, there was major impacts. And so that picture on the right is actually in my hometown. It's the place where when I was in high school and we were bored at like 8 o'clock at night, we'd like drive down to and watch the sunset or just hear the waves crash. And during Sandy, that entire neighborhood was just wrecked. People's first floors and basements just totally ruined, and people are still rebuilding. People have had to raise their houses. It's been a crazy process. But before Long Island, my parents grew up in Puerto Rico. And so last year, we saw what climate change really means. If Sandy was bad, Maria just made Sandy look like nothing. So that's a photo from La Lancha, the boardwalk, where my parents grew up going. There were shops and stores and, a place to go. And so for me, I really do this work because the places I love and the people I love are at risk from climate change. And then the Sierra Club, we are in New York. We've crafted a vision for what we want our future to look like. So staff and volunteers have gotten together over the years to put this together. And we want New York State to be a leader in the nation and the world in creating an equitable, just society based on 100% clean, renewable energy. And in doing so, we want to build off the things that made New York great in the past. We're a great manufacturing base. You think of Xerox and Bethlehem Steel and Kodak. We have a lot of history here in New York that we should be building off, and we can build into a new 21st century economy. We also want to make sure that we are protecting the vulnerable communities and restoring the economic vitality of communities that have been left behind historically. And we think renewable energy and a transition to renewable energy can do this. And so those are big, lofty goals. Like you can say, we want 100% renewable energy, and the question becomes, how do you get there? How do you build that out? And we really believe that it's important to have interim steps. And so every single fight makes a difference. We particularly worked on making sure that we have a 50% renewable electricity target in New York, that we're moving forward in offshore wind downstate. We're working on an enforceable energy efficiency target. And now what I'll focus in on here is the nation's first carbon intensity limit on existing power plants. None of these actions by themselves are going to save the day, like I'm going to acknowledge that, but together with what we're working on and with all the work that's going on across New York, fighting pipelines, fighting other gas plants, promoting renewable heating, all of this adds up to how we get to 100%. So, earlier this year, the Department of Environmental Conservation, the DEC, put forward the power plant pollution protections. These are rules that will put in place the first carbon intensity standard on existing power plants. So I'll break that down what that means. So basically it says this is how much carbon you can put out based on how much power you generate or how much BTUs you take in. It's sort of two formulas that work, it adds up to the same thing. It isn't a limit on total carbon emissions. So it isn't just going after, say, big plants. It's going after the really inefficient, dirty, and outdated plants. And so if you think about it, these are plants that are very old, they are better ways to make energy, and they make the most sense to retire first. And so the good things about this regulation. First, it sets a really important precedent. We're the first state in the country to do this kind of rule, and I fully expect it'll probably be challenged in court. We think they'll win the day. I don't think they would have put it out if they didn't think they were going to win the day. But it sets an important precedent that can be used to go further. It also, right now, as the proposed rule stands now, eliminates coal burning in New York, and that mostly impacts the Cayuga power plant's coal burning, as well as the Somerset coal plant out in Niagara County. And this makes good on the governor's pledge to phase out coal. 2 years ago, he made a pledge to phase out coal. This is actually how he makes good on that promise. And coal is dirty. There's mercury, there's SOx, there's NOx, there's lots of toxins that are produced by coal burning that are kept on site from the landfills, and this eliminates a lot of that. There's still the cleanup at the landfills, but at least we're not producing more junk and putting out more pollutants into our air and water. And coupled with a statewide transition plan, it gives us a model of how to responsibly retire power plants. This rule right now affects 2 power plants. There are workers and communities, so the workers are going to be laid off or you have to do early retirement, and the community is going to lose some taxes. That is a reality of it, but if we, the state, works together and works smart, we can figure out how to retire this plant responsibly to the least impact in a way that sets a model for how to do it. Because we need to transition on fossil fuels. We need to retire all of the fossil fuel plants in New York. This is our opportunity to figure out how to do this right. So, like anything, any rule, any regulation, there are things that could be done better in this rule. One of the first things that we're asking for, we want explicit language, explicit commitment from DEC to reevaluate this rule. They could go, okay, great, we're going to get rid of coal and then never look at this again and walk away and not do anything. That's not really what we need if we want to tackle climate change. We want to make sure that DEC is committed to reevaluating the rule as time goes on so we can continue retiring dirty power plants. And so, right now it retires the 2 coal-fired power plants. But you look at the plants, in terms of carbon, most carbon intensive is 3 through 10 are outdated natural gas plants. They used to be coal plants decades ago. Then they switched to oil. Then they switched to gas around New York City and Long Island and environmental justice communities. And it's really important that we tackle those as well. It's difficult. These plants are big. There's a lot of them. But we need to make sure that this rule actually gets at them in the long term. We also might need to make sure that this rule does not allow for plants to repower to both gas and, in some concerns, they could also do biomass. So we want to make sure that those loopholes are closed. The DEC doesn't have the power to just write language that goes, you can't repower. They can't do that. It's not legally defensible. But what they can do through this rule we think is justifiable is to hold these plants to new source standards, essentially because whenever you do a major upgrade on a facility, that could trigger a process where you're basically counted as a new power plant. New power plants are held to much higher standards than existing power plants. If they were held to these new source standards, they would face compliance costs that are truly exorbitant, and they likely could not afford to repower these plants to gas. I will say that is a bit of a stretch. I don't know if DEC will go that far. They're being cautious with this rule. They are, worried about what kind of backlash they're going to face. So that's why we have to go and hold their feet to the fire. But also, if we shout loud enough and are out there pushing them, even if we don't win here, we can set up a process to push through and push on this power plant. And so maybe they go, oh, we're not going to do it in this regulation, but we have these other ways we can do it. And so, just want to set people up for the fact that if we don't win this one, we're not giving up. We're going to keep fighting and keep pushing. And we also are asking the governor to make sure that there is a more comprehensive transition plan. And we want this for 2 reasons. One is it's simply the moral right thing to do. These workers have worked hard in these power plants, and these communities have been their hosts. They've been subject to the pollution up front. And it's so that we can turn the lights on. We have benefited historically from the burning of fossil fuels, and we should do right by the people that worked and did that for us. It's also the strategic thing to do. If the story becomes, oh, we closed a power plant, but we destroyed jobs, we destroyed a community, that makes the next fight harder. And so if we can show a path of we can do this right, it makes retiring future power plants a much easier thing. So, how can you get involved? First of all, there is a petition that was floating around at some point. I don't know if I made it to a table. It's somewhere out there that you can just sign the petition. We'll be submitting those to the DEC as part of the comment period on this rule, so you can have your voice heard. And then you can also join us on the 24th to the bus to the DEC office in Avon. For folks that may not know, it's like 45, 50 minutes south of Rochester. So we'll be taking a bus leaving promptly at 8:30. We'll be back latest 4 p.m. If people testify and are ready, we'll be here sooner. You can go to that link to reserve your seat. If you've also given us your contact information, we can make sure to just email you that link, so it's really easy. The seats are free. We are just trying to get as many people to join us, and so you can reserve your spot. Donations, of course, are always appreciated. We'll use it to snacks and things on the bus. And we are recommending you bring lunch, water. The DEC office is a little bit in the middle of nowhere, so you're on your own. And if you have specific questions about the regulation and the sort, we're going to hold that till later. Thank you guys for taking the time to listen to me. David Alicea, and I can give you my card afterwards. So that you know.
Is there a record that people can put comments to, send comments, especially if they can't come to?
Yeah, there's
Yes.
an email address, yeah.
Yes, I don't know the email off the top of my head, but
I think it's airregs@DEC or something.
Yeah, I'll look it up in the
We'll get it.
meantime.
We'll get it.
You spell your last name.
It's Alicea. It's a fun one.
Right, and I think that
We're pulling up these slides, and I'm the last speaker, so you've been a very patient audience, and hope you can remember all the questions that you might have. We are so happy you're here, and I also want to thank the county legislator that represents Lansing for coming today, because I think it's wonderful that he's here to hear what we have to say and to hear from you, his constituents. So please, thanks for being here. It's really nice to have our representatives joining this forum. So my name is Lisa Marshall. I'm a community organizer with the nonprofit Mothers Out Front. Some of my wonderful volunteer leaders are here with me today who organize right here in Tompkins County, and I also support teams in Chemung County, Steuben County, Westchester, and some other areas around the state. I have a background in earth science. I also was a military wife. My husband served for 21 years in the United States Navy. And when we retired, we were lucky enough to move to this beautiful part of the world and raise our 3 children here. A few weeks ago, actually it was a couple months ago now, a really great organizer for Food and Water Watch sent out a tweet about gun issues. And he said he was 16 when Columbine happened. And he thought that the grown-ups would do something. And that really got me thinking, because I was 16 when I wrote my first paper on climate change. And I just turned 50. And I thought the grown-ups would do something. And now we're the grown-ups. And as it was mentioned earlier, this is not a partisan issue. There has been no meaningful, substantive action taken on climate change at the federal level in any administration in my lifetime. So it's only just getting worse and worse and worse, and that's why I do this work. It's almost there. So I will just keep talking. I also can sing, so you might although my mouth is a little dry. I'm going to say that, in case I forget, we have some wonderful things you can do right away. We have these postcards that the Tompkins County Mothers Out Front team has put together to let the city of Ithaca and Cornell know that we do not want them using fracked gas to heat the new dorm expansion that they're building, so you can sign those. We have letters to Governor Cuomo about the Cayuga power plant, which also talks about the climate issue, the history of the plant, some of the political implications with this plant, and also asking for workers to be retrained, and for the city of Lansing, or the town of Lansing, the city or town? The town of Lansing, good, I wrote the right thing, to get revenue to make up for the shortfall in the tax. So that's all in this letter, which you can sign and leave with us here. We will send them to Governor Cuomo because we know they're going to end up at the floor of your car. And then this is, you did the sign-in sheet, but this is a next steps form where you can say, I like to write, I like to call people, I like to use social media, I like to organize events, and you can let us know what kinds of things you like to do so you can fill one of these out. Okay, so why am I here? Because I have these 3 beautiful children, and although these are my children, most of you probably have children or have children in your life that you care about. And that's why I do this work, and that's why it's really important that we take action on this issue. So those are my 3 kids. And we talked about climate change, but we really didn't go into it. I'm not really going to go into it, except to say that this is a graph of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that is measured at consistently in Hawaii, and it has been for more years than shows on this chart. And when I was born, what happened here? That number changed. It was 320 parts per million carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And when my oldest child was born, it was 360 parts per million, which is just above the threshold that we understand to be sort of the safe amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And now it's above 410 parts per million. So what does that mean? Go ahead. So you hear a lot from people who are really skeptical about climate change, and they say, well, the amount of carbon dioxide historically has been up and down, and the temperatures have varied, and that is all completely 100% true. And so here you can see 800,000 years of climate history of the amount of carbon dioxide, and it varies quite a bit. And then you are here. So what happened here that was different?
Fossil fuel.
Fossil fuels, the Industrial Revolution. We started to take carbon that had been stored in the Earth's crust over hundreds and hundreds of millions of years, and in 200 years proceeded to burn quite a bit of it, and we are still doing it more and more each year. So what does that mean for us right now? It means it's getting hotter. It doesn't always mean it's going to be hotter, but it means that on average the Earth's temperature is hotter. It doesn't mean you're not going to have really cold times and cold days. You are. What it means is the average temperature is getting hotter and hotter and hotter. And just this week's climate news has been so heartbreaking. Over 60 people died in Quebec from heat. Los Angeles had record-breaking heat, 120 degrees and above. We hired a new organizer in California, and her kids play football, and the smoke from the fires is making it unsafe for them to, aside from how unsafe it is to play football, but to go out and do football practice. So it's happening all around, and all you have to do is open paper. Okay, so, well, how does that bring us to New York? Because aren't we a leader in climate here in New York? Don't we have this governor who talks all about how he's going to be the climate leader? Well, this is a wonderful map, which Karen may have shown you when I ran out to the car because I forgot to bring in the postcards. But these are the pipelines, compressor stations, power plants in New York State. These dotted lines are ones that were proposed, and I can report to you that those were defeated by community action. This was the Constitution Pipeline and the Northeast Direct, and this is the Pilgrim Pipelines. So we are here, I live right there on the intersection of two of the biggest pipelines in New York, the Dominion Line and the Millennium Line, and my house is basically more or less right there. And that yellow dot is a compressor station, so go ahead. So how does the gas get through the pipeline? Well, you have to build a big machine to push it through. So this is a field not far from my house a year ago, and this is what it looks like now. There's a big compressor station there. I found out they were going to build this compressor station when my daughter did a school history project and interviewed Sandra. And she said, you know, they're going to build a compressor station near you. And I said, what's a compressor station? And anyway, that's what led me to be here today. Long story short. So this is pretty bad news, but don't panic. Organize, and that's what I'm here to talk about. And we're going to just go quickly. I'm not going to do them. So why organize? Just go through that. So today you heard about Seneca Lake gas storage. That was an amazing, and LPG storage, an incredible example of beautiful community organizing, and we won. But that's not actually that unusual. This is a great graph that I stole from my friend Mike at the Energy Justice Network, which shows all different kinds of proposed energy and waste facilities. The blue are the proposed, and the red are built. So a lot of those got defeated by community organizing, and we can do that here too. So Mothers Out Front, we're trying to build a national movement of mothers and grandmothers, friends and allies to speak truth to power and get decision makers to move on climate change, to make decisions that move the needle forward. Use our political power as mothers, our political voice as mothers, really advocating for our own children's future. That's what we're trying to do. So what happens when you organize? Each of us alone, when faced with all of this information, you've gotten a lot of information today, feels very, or I felt, I can say, very lonely and isolated. I wrote this paper when I was 16, nothing happened. I went out and hit the streets and tried to get the right politicians elected and worked really hard, and nothing happened, right? Because I was working by myself with this voice on climate change. I didn't even feel like I could talk to my friends about climate change. But then when you start to work together, you can equal the balance of power. The money is on one side, but we have the people, we have the science, and we have the facts. So with those things, we can win. just go ahead because we're late. So I'm going to talk a little bit about organizing. It's, you know, you guys heard about Rosa Parks. When I was in school, I learned, oh, she was tired and she just, you know, didn't feel like going to the back of the bus anymore, and so they arrested her, and then there was the Montgomery bus boycott. No, there was organizing going on all across the country and in Alabama, and people were meeting in rooms like this and talking about what are we going to do and what's our strategy and how are we going to get our voice heard and how are we going to collectivize our power. And that's what led to Rosa Parks not going to the back of the bus that day. No one talks about the organizing, but underneath each powerful act, like what Rosa Parks did or what like Sandra did, is a whole network of organizing that brings collective power together. And to do that, we build relationships, we tell our stories. I'm going to tell the story of what we did here today. 70 people came to the Tompkins County Library to hear these speakers. They are concerned about their community. You have to have a structure. If you don't have a structure, it's exhausting. You have to know who's going to do what, who's going to support what. Everybody can't do everything all the time. It's just, that's a recipe for disaster. You have to have a strategy, and you have to take action. So here's some of our Mothers Out Front wonderful team members, some from here, building relationships, telling our stories. Go ahead. Strategy, you need goals. What do you want? How long is it going to take you to get there? What resources do you have? What resources do you need? Who are you trying to reach? Are you trying to reach everybody in the world? We're trying to reach mothers. I don't know if I mentioned that. Targets, who can give you what you want? Who has the power to give you what you want? And you know what? So this just shows how we build power over time. When we fought the compressor, we didn't win, but we did delay it by a full year. It started with me, and I met one mom, one grandma. Just 2 people. And by the end, we had 2 organizing teams and hundreds of people involved. And just scroll through that. We did meetings, we did canvassing, we wrote letters, we met with the DEC, we called Governor Cuomo, and we're still building power across the state based on that, just me meeting one mom and us sitting down over a kitchen table and making a plan of what we were going to do. That just talks about leadership. It's really important to share leadership. We have one leader in the middle. It can be really effective until that leader, you know, leaves, and then you are leaderless. So it's good for all of us to develop our leadership, and that's the way we organize at Mothers Out Front. The Sierra Club does the same thing. We organize in a snowflake structure, so we share leadership and support each other. So I'm here to really urge you all to take action with us, with me, with Irene, with Karen, with the Mothers Out Front Tompkins County team that wants to help support people in Lansing to do what they've organized around here, with Sandra, and with all of us here who worked. This is some of the organizing we've been doing, and yeah, I think there's more. So here's some of the things we can do to start to build our power, because that is what helps us win. So we can start a community organizing team in Lansing, and we will support you and help you. And you can start by hosting a community gathering to talk about this issue. You can invite some of us to come and help talk about it and share information. Write a letter to the editor. There's been some already, and we need to have a whole lot more. Join our mailing list. Very important to know how to get in touch with people when things are happening. Call and write Governor Cuomo. We have a campaign going on with some allies calling him every Monday about a different gas infrastructure issue. And we are getting about 150 to 200 calls a week. We need probably 1,000 calls a week before he's really going to care about that. So you can help. Go with on the Sierra Club bus that they're so generously providing to the DEC hearing. If you didn't understand anything about David's presentation, that's okay. You can still go and speak. You are a constituent, you are a person. We have talking points, but you can also just tell your story and why you care about this issue. The DEC has to listen to you, and they have no choice. They only have to listen to you for 3 minutes, though. And we'll have a great time on the bus, except I won't, because I will be at a staff retreat. And share all this information with your networks. You know, if just the people who care about this only talk to each other in their echo chamber, we won't build the power we need to win. And that's what we absolutely have to do, working together. Thank you very much.
So thank you to Lisa and to all of our our presenters today and all of the organizers and activists who are in this room and all of the people who are joining us for jumping in and learning about what's going on and how you can be involved. I think at this point we can, actually, one person I'd like to introduce before I move into questions. In the back of the room here is our Assembly member, Barbara Lifton. And Barbara, as many of you know, has been just a stalwart supporter of our fight against fracking and methane and bringing transition support to communities that are losing power plants. And you want to say?
Yeah, just, here we are again. I guess not at a shocking place, I guess we knew that they bought the power plant for something, and we're waiting to see what was going to happen. So here we are in another phase of this fight, and we're trying to figure out what's going to happen and how to fight this effectively, and I'm going to be there fighting with you. We've got to, we should, Tony's got the data, we all understand what's going on, and we've got to fight every one of these projects that's happening with broadcast. So I'll be working closely with all of you. Thank you,
Barbara.
Okay, Russ, you had something I understand you wanted to say. Russ had something, and I'd like everybody to try to keep their comments brief, under 2 minutes.
I have a very brief comment about the truck safety carrying the gas. There was something in the local paper saying there's no oxygen, so there's no explosions. It's tested and tested, there's no problems. When the gas storage was proposed on Lake Seneca, I took a look at the transportation issue of gas. And at that time it was on railroad cars. And in 2009, in Viareggio, Tuscany, was the most damaging train explosion, which happened by a LPG train. 5 cars went off the track. 1 car hit a signaling stake, a gash 6 inches long. The gas under pressure came out, separated into 2 phases, and settled over the town. Within 3 minutes, something ignited the gas. A 75-foot high wall of fire killed 31 people, decimated the town in 3 minutes. 1 car, a 6-inch gash. The study was done by an engineering group at the University of Milan. In their analysis of what happened, they used data from trucks, because it turned out that the engineering study of the trucks that transport the gas have a cylindrical container, like the trains. So yeah, as long as there's no accident, there's no accident. But if there is an accident, the devastation is quick and it's devastation. It's not a trivial burning. My mind, the only way I could get around that is to think of napalm. That's the only thing I know, that's high and that's hot and that fast. So when they try to tell you that the trucks are safe, yeah, if there's no accident, they're safe.
Thank you, Russ. So I at this point like to open it up not to comments but to questions, because we wanted to have everybody speak, and then that we have the full picture of what we're thinking about and be able to ask us questions. So are there questions for any of our speakers?
So I have a question. People have been referring to we, and I'm not looking for names, but the we, in the hydrofracking days when we were, first looking at that and that was proposed, was not some we that came from outside and and said, here's what to do. It just was a bunch of people who sat around and said, oh, what is this all about? And took the different pieces. So if somebody,
the
we so far, and who's
the we is us, and there's
involved
some of us
if they
who have
want to
been
be we. And other than writing letters, if people want to take a piece, like I know, if we could use a scanner, if anybody has a scanner that feeds multiple pages, not just one page at a time, please come with me to the DEC, Judy.
So I think the most important thing is if people have signed up, on some of these sheets that we have your contact information and
Please.
So, Carol, Fossil Free Tompkins, Mothers Out Front, Sierra Club, hopefully we'll be able to work, Frack Tracker, we'll be able to work with Sandra too now that Crestwood is over, maybe there's, more that can be done. We is everybody who cares and wants to get involved, and the way that we'll know that is if you've signed up on some of these sheets that have passed around. So in particular, Elmer's notebook that had sort of like little graph paper on it, had a greenish color. Did people sign up that, and did Elmer get his book back?
No.
It's up on back on the table and we'll take a
Okay,
picture of
have
it.
people signed Elmer's book?
Some people did.
Where's the petition? The petition is
It's on the table.
on the table in the back? Okay. Postcards got passed around?
Postcards are
Why
here.
don't we pass
Don't
them
take
around?
them with you, give them back. So that's a great question. Who is we? We is you. And there are local groups like Irene's and my local Tompkins County team that I support who live and work right here. I live just down the pipeline in Horseheads. So, and Karen is the Lansing resident. So we is people who will support you if you want to take action on this issue. We are working together to solve this problem that is facing us.
I mean, if there are people here who are part of Fossil Free Tompkins Campaign for Renewable Energy, Clean, which is working on various issues on the lake, maybe those people want to stand, and that'll satisfy some of the question of who's we. So anybody from those groups?
We want them back. Yes.
Want to stand, please? Judy, hey, standing if you're part of Fossil Free Tompkins, Mothers Out Front, Campaign for Renewable Energy, Clean. All right, and then how many people were involved in Crestwood, defending Crestwood and Seneca Lake? Stand up or raise your hand if you were part of that. So that's who we is. We is anybody who steps in and says, this is not okay, and I'm gonna figure out ways to get involved. None of us knew. I mean, I didn't know, anything about power plants when I got started in this. But the internet's an amazing thing. The network of people within this community and up at Cornell and other networks that we work with across the country, information is available, and we can all do it. And we need to.
I want to say something about we also, since we're all guests. We, in 2011, were a handful of 5 or 6 towns across New York State who had the gumption to pass bans and moratoria in their towns. We became over 200 towns, municipalities, and cities in New York State who, a mere 3 years later, had compelling enough arguments for Cuomo to say no to fracking permanently in New York. We are the seed of a movement which is going to grow and do the right thing for renewable, clean energy, for our future, for our children, for our communities, for safety, for the environment, for 7 generations. That's who we are.
Thank you, Karen. Yeah, okay, man.
So I was wondering, for the heat recovery system, would it be possible to maybe compromise with NICEAG to maybe like get the system in place? Because you could probably make a financial statement saying like it would save money in the long run if they had a better heat recovery system.
I'll take that one. So if you want to look at the big picture of where we are right now in New York in terms of our energy and where we're going, we are converting rapidly everything to gas. Our electricity generation, our home heating, and what is happening is right now we get about 20% of our electricity generation from some nuclear power plants up on the lake. But those are not going to stay open for that much longer. And so if this plant can stay open until those shut down, then they can say, hey, now we need to build a brand new, really efficient power plant. And it will be more efficient than the one that's there now, and they could run it a whole lot more, and it will be a lot more efficient. But the basic bottom line issue with gas is that it's suicidal. We can't survive. You're a young man. When you're my age, if we keep burning the gas the way we are now, planet will be unlivable. So you can build more efficient plants. That's not the proposal on the table right now, but it absolutely could happen. But what Tony talked about with the leaked methane is still going on, and it's still going to go on. And we have better and better data about that every single day. We have data now from NASA, a recent paper published in Science, the most prestigious journal that is out there. The issue is that methane is a gas. It goes into the atmosphere. It warms the planet. So you can burn it more efficiently, and that's better than burning it less efficiently, but it's still not the energy future that we can afford to build at this point in our Earth's history.
Have they talked about reducing the leakage on the gas lines?
There are lots of people talking about reducing leakage at all different points. At compressor stations, you have old leaky one right here in Tompkins County. They could build a newer, more efficient one that leaked less, leaking less at the wellhead, leaking less on the pipeline, leaking less at the power plant. But it's really how fast are you driving towards the edge of the cliff in the fog? Are you going to drive at 100 miles an hour or 75 miles an hour? Either option is unacceptable.
Whatever we end up doing in terms of burning fossil fuels is still putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and we need to stop doing that. And every dollar that we end up investing in fossil fuels is money that we're not spending on renewables.
I'm going to get out.
That's the point.
I can finish with, I'm going to steal this from Sandra. So when we were kids, we made ashtrays in art in school for our parents and our grandparents. Can I quote you on this? So she told her kids that, and they said, wait a second, you made drug paraphernalia in school to bring home? They were like, that's crazy. We have to make digging up carbon that's been stored for hundreds of millions of years in the Earth's crust and burning it. So that unthinkable, so that when my grandchildren would say, you did what? That's crazy. So please leave these letters, postcards, and volunteer forms at the back table. Do not take them with you. We can make these available to print out, and you can send them, we can email them, we can fax them, as she said. And we are all going to stay in touch with you if you gave us your contact information and if you wrote your email legibly.
Yeah, and you can also find both Fossil Free Tompkins and Mothers Out Front online on Facebook.
Yeah, on the website.
Facebook, Fossil Free Tompkins, Mothers Out Front, I'm sure is Mothers Out Front.
MothersOutFront.org.
Yeah, so thank you all for coming and for your attention. If I could ask people to just, if you would help us stand up the chairs so that we can get out of here.